All right, continue our study of the Revelation. As I was preparing this week and calculating our rate of progress, I calculated that if we continue to progress at the rate at which we have been progressing the last few weeks, we will still be studying the book of Revelation when Christ returns.
As long as we understand it. What I've come to the conclusion is that we're below average class, so you're having to tutor us through it.
Okay, I'm going to proceed on that basis then.
Slow learning.
Remember, who is the guy who had Prairie Home Companion? He talked about his hometown of Lake Wobegon. And what did he say about it? He says, where the women were strong, the men were good looking, and all the children were above average. So we're going to assume that we're above average. So whatever that means. But we will continue to plod along. And if we happen to be studying the book of Revelation when Christ returns, that's not such a bad thing.
We get another blessing.
There we go. There we go. Yet one more. Okay, I think we're about up to chapter 3, and we're going to be studying some amount of review. The last 3 churches. Last time we read some about the church at Sardis, and I think we read a little bit about the church at Philadelphia. And this chart that Wanda prepares is really just extremely good. It's a great shorthand method to look back and to review where we've been and where we are. And what we said about the church at Sardis, remember, if you find in your chart down, if you look on the left side, the third one from the bottom, the church at Sardis is representative of the Reformation church that began around 1500 AD. And it really came in the wake and to address the evil of the papal church that arose out of the corrupt papacy at the time of, in the time frame of the 1400s to 1500 AD. And one of the things that it was said about the church at Thyatira, or the papal church, is it placed too much emphasis on works. You see one of the weaknesses we have listed in that column. They put too much emphasis on works rather than on faith. And it is said of them that one of their weaknesses is that they tolerated Jezebel, which I'll submit to you is the very spirit of Satan. And we studied about the story of Jezebel and what she accomplished, which meant, or which involved, for example, the taking from others by false means, idolatry, false representations. And one of the things that it said about the church at Thyatira is that they are at risk of tribulation. And you see that in, what verse is that? It's very important to what we're going to be talking about today.
What are you looking for?
Tribulation.
3. Is that 3?
Tribulation.
Do not wake up, I will come like a thief. No, that's Sardis.
Yeah.
You're in Thyatira?
Mm-hmm.
And what are you looking for?
For tribulation. Yeah, verse 22. Behold, I will cast upon her a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation. Okay? Make a note of that. Underline that, or put a star beside that. One of the things that we talked about before.
Is this 222?
222, yeah. 222.
222.
Yeah.
Ours doesn't say.
Right.
What does yours say?
Suffer intensely.
Suffer intensely. I think perhaps the word tribulation there may be significant, although it's really not anything different from intense suffering. But I think it relates to what the rest of the book is about, because one of the things that we noted in one of our earlier sessions is the fact that the first matter to be addressed by Christ in his revelation are these 7 churches. And we know that these letters were written to churches that existed at that time, but they really are to churches and to church leaders of all times, even to this day. And so it is there is a warning given to the churches about having to suffer the tribulation. And one of the things that we're going to see as we continue our study of Revelation is that a great deal of the book of Revelation is about what? It's about the tribulation. And so one of the things that we should be looking for is what can you do, or what might you do that would put you into the risk of tribulation, and then what should you do or refrain from doing that will take you out of the risk of tribulation. And I think what we have in the descriptions of these churches gives us a pretty good model and a pretty good description. You know, what is it that if you're found to be doing will put you into the risk of tribulation? Well, you know what? You got it right there if you study the book or study the letter to the church at Thyatira. And likewise, we're going to see about how you can avoid the risk of tribulation. And that's going to be, I think, in the message to the church at Philadelphia. But so there's just so much packed into these letters to these churches, so much about what our churches should be, what we should be, and what our principal focus should be, and what we need to get away from. And so we see, by way of review, the criticism of the papal church is they were putting way too much emphasis on works. And we know why they did that. You know, they had an ulterior motive to putting emphasis on works. Why? Because that's the way the church built up its property, its cash. It filled its coffers by telling people, you know what, you are very sinful, but if you put all your gold into the coffers of the church, then we can get you out of purgatory. Or if you give us this piece of valuable land, your good works will resound in heaven. And so they were abusing that. Again, not to downplay works. Works certainly have their place. But salvation by works is a false teaching of the papal church, the church at Thyatira. And so then what happens next? Then comes along the Reformation church, and we know that historically that the Reformation church led by Martin Luther came out of the corrupt papacy. But in referring to the Reformation church, the church at Sardis, Christ points out that you have some strengths, but you also have some weaknesses. And one of the things that he says about the church at Sardis that I like, that I have recorded there in that strength column under Sardis, is that Christ says to the church, you have a name. And that's a profound thing. Because what is he saying? What does that really mean? When he says you have a name, to the Jewish mind, to have a name, your name is synonymous with what? Your character. And so here when Christ is saying you have a name, saying you have a character, and it's not just a humanistic character, saying you have a characteristic of God, something that God has given to you. Because remember we studied before that in the letter to the church at Pergamum, the promise that was given under there, if you look at Pergamum under promise, it says, what, I will give you the hidden manna, but I will also give you a white stone with a new name, and it's a new name that nobody else knows. And by that, I think we're told that when we are fulfilled, when we get to heaven, God is going to give us all a new name, which is a new character. And the new character we're going to have is some unique aspect of God's character. We're all going to be different, but we're all going to reflect a different shade of God's character. And what a wonderful thing that's going to be, if we're all reflecting a different shade of God's character at that time. But that's a promise that's given to us. And so Jesus says to the church of Sardis, the Reformation church, you have a name, but he also says your work is not complete. Because as we also know by history, that the Reformation church went off the rails at a time almost as badly as the Catholic Church had gone off the rails. You know, that the Catholic Church under the corrupt papacy did a lot of unholy things in the name of the church. Well, the Reformation Church, they started out well, right? They started out well with their byline was sola fide, faith alone. Salvation is by faith alone and not by works. But pretty soon they went off the rails too. And the best example of that is what happened in Tudor England around the time of Henry VIII. He claimed to be a part of the Reformation Church. And what did he do? He abused, quote unquote, the church as much as the Catholic Church had abused their power. And you see, if you study Tudor England, you'll see that there came a time that it was so brutal what the different church groups were doing to each other. You had the Catholics and the Protestants. Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, was Catholic, and their daughter, Mary, was also Catholic. As you know, Mary came to the throne. She was the first successor to Henry VIII. Well, Henry VIII was a Protestant, so while he was promoting the Protestant church, he was burning Catholics. Well, as soon as Henry died and Mary comes to the throne, she's a Catholic. What does she do? She starts burning the Protestants, okay? And that's why they called her Bloody Mary, and it just flipped back and forth. But the whole point is that all of this evil, all of these terrible things were being done in the name of the church. You know, whether it's the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church, and Christ says, look, y'all are both off track. Neither one of you should be doing any of those horrible things that you have been doing, and that history has recorded that you've done. You need to get back to what you're supposed to be doing. And to the church of Sardis, he says, what? Wake up, remember, repent, remember what you received and heard. That is, what you received and heard is you received the revelation that salvation is by faith alone and not by works. So go back to doing that. Get focused on salvation by faith, and don't be patting yourself on the back for all the good works that you do. And for heaven's sakes, churches, don't abuse good works by shaming your people into doing things improperly in the name of the church. Okay.
I have something to ask.
Yes, sir. You need to ask that to Wanda, by the way.
Okay. Verse 4, it says,
Verse 4 of chapter what?
3.
3, 4.
I will
Okay.
never blot out his name from the book of life.
Mm,
That's, to me, is tough.
yeah.
Christ seems like salvation puts our name in the Lamb's book of life.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like if he don't want us in there,
Yeah.
we're not doing right, I guess, if we're not following him.
Well, what you see, Brother Kenny does, he has stirred up, he's opened the can of worms. Because what does this do? This makes us question, makes us question the Baptist doctrine of what?
It's the staff of,
Well,
He said he who overcomes will be dressed in white.
Verse 4.
Of 3, 4.
this last,
Yeah, of 3.
3, and then he's
4.
talking about 4 and 5.
yes, 5, yeah. He will comes will like them be dressed.
Mine
in-
doesn't say that.
I will never blot out his name from the book of life.
From the book of
I
life.
will never yet, verse 5, I will
Oh,
not
5.
erase his name or blot his name out from the book of life. So what does that imply? That implies the possibility that your name could be written in the book of life and then erased or written out.
I don't read it that way. To
Well,
me, if it's in there, he will never blot it out.
Okay, well, that's a different way of looking at
He who
it.
overcomes.
Yeah. I will not erase his name.
So we
And this
must
is
stay,
where, 3,
we must
4?
stay close to
This
it.
Yeah.
Three,
Stay with it.
4 and 5. 4 and 5. Chapter 3, verses 4 and 5.
One says you have still a few persons in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes,
Okay.
meaning that they're still walking with him.
Right.
Mhm.
And read on.
Following him, they will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy.
Well,
Keep
I'll put
going.
this
If you
in.
conquer, you will be clothed like them in white robes, and I will not blot your name out of the book of life.
And I will not-
Confess your name before my Father and before his angels.
You know, we've seen it and heard it, and it says that your name is written in the book of life. Well, maybe everybody's name is written in the book of life.
Yeah, it's another
And
way
when
to
you
look
make
at it.
that decision, if you're working for the devil and, you know, you don't accept Christ, he blots your name out of the book.
It's interesting. I went through and there are literally dozens of references to God having a book in which he writes things down, particularly your name. And one of my favorite I've written down, I didn't write them all down, but if you look under Sardis, I've written down Psalm 139:16. Brother Kenny, would you read that for us since you opened this can of worms? 139:16. And so, of course, what this challenges is the once saved, always saved. In other words, once your name is written in the book of life, can it ever be erased or can it ever be blotted out?
What Kenny is saying, that makes a lot of sense, because God created each one of us.
I'm sorry.
And his name
It
is,
might be in the book of life, but some might have it in bold.
Well, when you're a child, remember, before you become the age of knowledge or whatever, then
Your name, maybe your name, like.
Until you make the choice, like you
Yeah.
said, to reject.
Well, let's read let's listen to what Kenny has to say. He's gonna answer the
139.
question. 139:16, I hope I wrote it down right.
Yeah,
What does that say?
Okay.
start with when I was born.
Yeah. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be.
And what it's talking about, that's the psalm that says, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. You weaved me together in my mother's womb. And before I had any days, you had already written down in your book all the days before any one of them had taken place. So what does that tell you? That your name is in God's book at the time of your conception in your mother's womb. Wow. So the question is then, all right, so your name is there. I mean, I didn't make that up. Kenny made that up. And he just read it. He just read it. When we're weaved together in our mother's womb, God has ordained all of our days. All right, so he's got a book, and your name is in it. Not only is your name in it, all of your days are in it. So then the question is, I think, you remain in there unless and until your name is blotted out. And I think what the chapter 3 of Revelation says is, yes, your name can be blotted out.
And
That's sad news, but I think it can. But the good news is we all start out at the time of our conception with our name and all of our days being written in God's book. And I kind of like that.
it's probably the name that we're gonna have in heaven.
Yeah,
You know, we'll be known by another name.
yeah. That wonderful name he's going to give us that reflects his
It's
character.
in the book.
Yeah, yeah. What a great thought that is. But again, be on your guard, because I'm not going to launch off into some dissertation of theology except to say that the Scripture is true, and there's a lot of pieces we need to put together. And what Kenny just read in Psalm 139:16, I really like. We should also be concerned about what this says. So let's finish up. I don't know that we got into all the details of what Brother Kenny was leading us to there. The church of Sardis, we see that again represents a Reformation church. Christ says, I know your deeds, you have a name, your work is not complete. And then he uses some symbolism there. He says in verse 4, in fact, Kenny, why don't you read 4 through 6 for us?
3.
Yeah, chapter 3, you go 4 through 6.
Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me, dressed in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out his name from the book of life, but will acknowledge his name before my Father and his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
What do you make of that reference there to white garments? He who overcomes shall thus be clothed in white garments. What is that a reference to?
Redemption,
Purity.
Innocence.
purity.
Yeah, all that. You remember at the time of the transfiguration, when the disciples went up and Jesus was transfigured before them, what was he wearing?
White.
He was wearing the white garments. And so when it said that he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, what does that mean? What you said was true, but basically it says, if we're in Christ and Christ is in us, then what? Then we're wearing white garments. And those are the kind of white garments we really want. That we want the garment that Christ himself is wearing. I've given you some other references there. For example, that's Matthew 17:2. In Psalm 51:7, David cries out, he says, wash me and I will be whiter than snow. There's a reference there in Isaiah 61:10 to that same thing about being clothed in the garment, being clothed in the cloak of righteousness. And Jesus himself told many parables about the cloak of righteousness. You remember the parables about the guy who shows up at the wedding feast and he's not wearing the proper clothes, and what happens to him? They bind him up and they cast him out. That's what this is talking about. The proper garment is the cloak of righteousness, which is not something that we can make. It's only something that can be given to us, and it's representative of the righteousness that Christ possesses, that he wants us to have and he wants us to wear. Yes, ma'am?
So the people who have not soiled their clothes, those are the ones who have accepted Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's not, because we're all
And then,
sinners,
yes,
but we have
accept
the,
the faith.
right,
Like
Get
That's
the
right.
faith and have fall into the idolaters or the sorcerers.
we have Jesus.
Yes.
Put on his cloak, right?
That's right, that's
Okay.
right. And that's the thing that we need to remember, that Jesus tells us, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. We should be seeking the righteousness of God. That ought to be our first priority. And it's a righteousness that we cannot make for ourselves by our own right conduct. He is the righteousness, and his righteousness is imputed to us on the basis of our faith. So we should be wearing the garment that he gives to us, that he offers to us.
Quint learned another Bible verse. We had him at Reynolds Springs Baptist Early Learning Center. Last week he learned Ephesians 6:11, put on the whole armor of God. And he said, Mommy, that old devil mean. So whatever it is, however they teach these 3-year-olds, he knows that Bible verse. He's got a sponge.
Yeah.
But he
Well,
knows the
that's
Bible
great.
verse, and he knows that the armor, he was protected, yes.
Mhm. That's great. I love to hear stuff like that. All right, let's look at now at the Church of Philadelphia. And the Church of Philadelphia, as you can see from your chart, it's one of the two churches about which there's no weakness, if you will, given. The Church of Smyrna gets only accolades and not criticism, the same way with the Church of Philadelphia. The Church of Philadelphia is said to be representative of the missionary church. The missionary church is a church that grew up in the early 1800s, and the first Christian missionaries were from England. And the missionaries went out from England to Africa, they went to India, they went to the uttermost parts of the earth and did a pretty good job. After the English empire began to decline, America picked up the mantle of the missionary church, and in the early 1900s, America began to send its missionaries out to various places. And these missionary churches receive high commendation. And one of the things that we're admonished to do, I believe, as we study the commendation given to the missionary church, is to focus on our own life. One of the things I wrote up on the board, or the thing that I wrote up on the board this morning, is that if you are not on a mission, you're not in a right relationship with Christ. Believe that?
Yes.
Does Christ expect all of us to be on a mission?
Yes.
I think so. And before we get into this, what does it mean to be on a mission? Does it mean to dream up stuff to do for God and then ask God to bless you as you go out on your mission?
Do what he wants you to do this day. He asked of you for this day.
That's it. That's what. Say that again, Brother Kenny.
Do what Christ asked you to do for this day.
That's right. You know, one of the best examples of that attitude towards mission is displayed in Christ himself. In fact, if you look at John chapter 5, verses 17 and 19, what does Jesus say? Jesus says, my Father is working even until this very day. He didn't stop at the time of creation. God is working now, he says. And that applies to us. God is working among us right now. And then what does he say? He says, Jesus himself said, I can't do anything unless I see my Father at work. And when I see him at work, then I join him, and then I'm empowered by him to do what? To do his will, to do his work that day and at that particular time. You know, you think about the mistaken ideas that people have today about what mission work is. And so many churches, so many people spend so much time trying to dream up something that they can do for God. You think about the Old Testament characters who were on a mission. Think about old Noah. You think old Noah dreamed up building that big old boat?
He's been on food.
You think he said, hey God, I got this great idea. I know that it's never rained before, but I'm thinking, what if I built this big old boat? What if I spent 150 years building it and then loaded it up full of animals? Would you bless that? No, that's not what happened. God came to Noah and he said, Noah, here's your mission. Build me a boat. And what does Noah say? He said, that's a great idea.
What's that?
What in the world would I want to build a boat for? And what you're going to do what with it? How are you? And all those animals are going to come into it? How's that going to happen? So no. Noah didn't think up stuff to do for God. God came to him and gave him a plan and told him, this is what you're going to do. And then God equipped him to do it. I think about Noah, and even with his 3 sons, how in the world could Noah and his 3 sons, even you give them an unlimited amount of time, how could you build something that huge? It is humanly impossible. The only way they got it done is how?
Through God.
God made it happen. Think about Abraham and the assignment. Was it Abraham who dreamed up? He's down there in Ur of the Chaldeans. I think what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to move over to this land that I've never heard of before, that's inhabited by the Canaanites. I'm going to become the father of a great nation, and through me all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. Did he dream that up? No. God gave him the assignment. Think about old Moses. Was Moses a willing participant in the assignment that God gave him? How many excuses did Moses give when he has this burning bush experience? And what does God tell him? He says, I want you to go to Pharaoh, who Moses happened to be running from for his life, because when Pharaoh found out that Moses had killed that Egyptian, he put a bounty on his head, right? And so he fled. He was gone for 40 years. So God says to Moses, hey, I want you to go into the court of Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. And what does Moses say? That's a great idea, God. I can't imagine. I didn't think of that first. No, what does he say? Find somebody else. I can't speak properly. The guy's trying to kill me. If you didn't know that, so can you pick somebody else? No, that's not what happened. God chose Moses. He gave him a specific assignment, and then did he equip him to accomplish his purposes? Is there any way that Moses could have accomplished those purposes by himself and under his own power? Of course not. The list goes on, but think about one more. Think about Daniel. Did Daniel say, hey God, how about taking me into the captivity of the Babylonians and keeping me over there for the rest of my life? Think that was Daniel's idea? I don't think so. But boy, did Daniel flourish by just worshiping God and remaining true to God. I mean, he was a guy who stood in the presence of 2 leaders of the world. And he became an advisor to both of them. What a great man of God. But again, Daniel didn't invent this stuff that he wanted to do for God. He just listened to God, and he watched where God was working, and he had a willing heart to join him. So that's really what, as Kenny said, that's what mission work is all about. Mission work is not dreaming up stuff for God and then asking God to bless your plans. What is it? It is patiently listening and having a desire to hear his voice and praying that God would reveal his will to you, and pray that God would open up your eyes, open up your spiritual eyes so that you can see where he's working, and that God will change your heart and give you a heart that runs to him. And if you do that, that's being on mission. If you're on mission, you're in a right relationship with God. If you're not on mission, you got a problem somewhere.
That's where I was thinking our main mission is to remain faithful to God. And all these other things, if we can do that, these other things are going to be added. Because
That's right.
What's going in our nation today, I don't know if I've told some of them, but in South Carolina, it's they're accepting and got the gender and all kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In the Southern Baptist, it's the church, I can't remember the name, but it's the church that our first Southern Baptist president came from. And they're going to, they're going to transgender or whatever, they're going to
Wow.
bring them in and as preachers and, ordain them.
Yeah. You're talking about the Church of Laodicea, specifically there. You absolutely are. We're going to get to that in just a second. All right, the message to the Church of Philadelphia. Who wants to read that for us?
I was going to say that yesterday our church had a mission that was to be with the Potter family. helping
Yeah,
them through
that's
their
right.
time of lost and the conference there. And
Yeah. That is a very important mission.
And quite a few people, ones who visited, those who
Yeah.
pulled together, prepared food.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
real nice, and it was
Yeah.
really a good home coming from Miss Betty.
There you go.
Knowing
Yeah.
how she was with the Lord doing her
Yeah.
missions.
That's right. That's right. Beautiful service. Who's got that for us? Chapter 3, verses 7 through 13. All right.
To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name.
Pause right there. What she read, there's an awful lot to that. I don't want to go too quickly through it. It says, the writer, Christ, describes himself as the one who is holy and true, who holds the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one will open. That is almost a direct quotation from Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22. But what is the key of David? Everybody knows who David was. He was not the first literal king of Israel, but he was the first king of Israel that was ordained by God. And Christ
Is in the lineage of Christ?
That's right. That's exactly right. Remember, Saul was the first king, but God didn't ordain him as king. He had David anointed and ordained as king because David was God's choice. So to reference the key of David is a reference to the kingship of Christ and the power that he has. And he says, I have put before you an open door which no one can shut. What does that mean?
An opportunity.
An opportunity. When God,
Opportunity to be redeemed.
not just that, if we look at it, and that's true what Nancy says, but it's also when God gives you a mission, when he opens your eyes so that you can see what your mission field is, he is the one who is going to open the door for you. And when he opens the door, no man can shut it. When he shuts the door, nobody else can open it. Remember that strange story about Paul when he was on his missionary journey and he's wandering along in Asia Minor and he wants to go to certain places and he can't. He says, the Spirit stopped me. You know, that you may encounter that. You may be going along on your mission and something happens. You're sent in a different direction. Was Paul on the wrong track? No. He was doing what God intended for him to do, but his spiritual eyes were open so that he saw when he was supposed to go in a different direction, a certain door was shut and he was sent a different way. So that's an example of that. So, but we must know that when Christ opens the door, no man can shut it. And when he shuts the door on you, don't think that you can open it up by your own power. That's the nature of missions. Read on.
I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you.
See, hold it. I love that scene there. It's the Jews who have rejected Christ. Ultimately, what are they going to see? They're going to see that we were right in acknowledging Christ as the Messiah, and they're going to bow down humbly, not so much before us, but before Christ himself.
That's them dry bones.
That's right. There you go. All right, read on.
Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come upon the whole world to test those who live on the earth.
Pause right there. That is some of the most powerful stuff that is said, I think, in all these letters. Is I will keep you from the hour of testing, that hour that is about to come. What is that saying? And what is that a prediction of?
Tribulation.
The rapture.
The rapture, that's right, that's right. What we see here is that it is those who are of the nature of the mission church that will be raptured. That is the church that will be raptured. We read over here that the church of Sardis is at the one before that, I'm sorry. The church of Thyatira was at the risk of tribulation. So they may have to go through the tribulation, but if we have the spirit of the church of Philadelphia, then we avoid the tribulation. How? When the trumpet sounds, we receive the call and we're out of here. We don't have to study anymore about that tribulation because we're beyond it. And of course that is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. It's rapture, and I've got that written down in that last column there. If you want to go and look at that. All right, Wanda, read on.
I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Him who overcomes I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will he leave it. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on him my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
That's some good news there. It says, he who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. I've given you some reference there to a pillar in the temple. What does it mean if you're a pillar in the temple of God?
You sound
Like
an
elder.
Well, it means you're a permanent fixture there. It means that you cannot be taken out, and I like that. And then I also like that I will write upon him, that I'll write upon you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem. You know what that's a reference to? When Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, they came in and they killed a lot of people. They also decided they were going to make some slaves and take them back. And so the generals got the first choice of the slaves. And what they did, and there's sort of a pecking order there, the higher you were of rank, the better your choice of slaves. But what they did is they took the Jews who were in Jerusalem and they wrote the name of the general who owned them on their foreheads and also the city where they were going. And so those who read this back in the first century knew what he was talking about. He says, I will write upon him my name and the city where you're going, which is the New Jerusalem. So all those who were taken away as slaves, now the new declaration is God himself is going to write his name on your head, and he's also going to write the city of your destination, which is heaven or the New Jerusalem. Okay, we're going to try to finish the church of Laodicea. Who wants to read that for us? Nancy, you want to read? Starting in verse 14.
And to the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the origin of God's creation. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing. You do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Therefore I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white robes to clothe you, and to keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, and salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see. I reprove and discipline those whom I love. Be earnest, therefore, and repent. Listen, I am standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you, and eat with you, and you with me. To the one who conquers, I will give a place with me on my throne, just as I myself conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
So this church of Laodicea receives the full condemnation of Christ. And what is the beginning point of the condemnation? What does he say about him that is so reprehensible? You're neither cold or hot. I heard something on a TV clip the other day that really made my blood run cold. Some news person was interviewing church members of various churches. And the issue was, what does your church think about, or what is your church's position on same-sex marriage? And they had all the extremes. And one of the extremes was, no, we hate homosexuals. We would never let a homosexual darken our doorway. So we keep them out. We're against it. Another one says, no, we think, this is a church saying, we think that same-sex marriage, homosexuality is a valid alternative lifestyle, and we embrace not only the homosexual, but also the homosexual lifestyle and same-sex marriage. Another one said this, my church is neither hot nor cold on this issue. And I thought, wow, we are there. That is the church of Laodicea. To be neither hot nor cold. You think, well, to be neither hot nor cold, what's wrong with that? Jesus says, I would rather that you be cold rather than lukewarm. Why? Because if you're cold, then you have some hope. But if you're lukewarm, if you just don't take a position on anything, it's like anything goes, any sort of doctrine, whatever it is goes, then you're gone. And ultimately, what is said about the church of Laodicea is, in fact, they have locked Christ out. The verses that we read at the end says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. You think, well, that's a wonderful thing about the nature of Christ. He stands at the door and knocks. But why is he standing at the door of the Laodicean church and knocking? because he's on the outside. He has been put there by the church.
He wants them to open it up and receive
Yeah.
it.
And he says, I'm here. I want to come in if you just let me come in. But what you've done is you have locked me out. What a sad state of affairs. You think that's a church that's going to be going through the tribulation? I reckon so. You think, is that a church that's going to be raptured, going to participate in it? I don't think so. And he says, what is your problem? You're lukewarm. I'm going to spew you out of my mouth because you say, I am rich and I've become wealthy and I have need of nothing. Boy, that is a big problem. Not just financial prosperity, but just the belief that we are self-sufficient, that we can cure ourselves, that we can take care of whatever needs we have apart from Christ. That puts you in a miserable state of affairs. He says, but you don't even know who you are and what you are. You think you're rich, but you're not. What are you? You're poor, you're wretched, you're miserable, you're blind. He says, I advise you to buy from me gold refined in the fire. Why does he make reference to gold there?
Well, to me, he said, buy it.
Buy it, get it.
Yeah, get it, receive
That's
it. You've got to give something for it.
That's right. You need to sell all the stuff that you have that you think is worthwhile and buy true gold. We know.
He's not just
It's an
giving it
idiom
to
for
them.
removing sin from one's life.
What's that?
It's an idiom for removing sin from one's life.
Right. But what is gold? What is gold a symbol of?
Purity.
Purity, but
Treasures, the
Value.
spiritual treasures.
spiritual treasures, the golden lampstand, all of the implements in the temple and the tabernacle were made of gold. But you know what? One of my favorite references to gold is in the book of Esther, where there is no reference to God Himself. What was it that saved the nation of Israel? What act was it that saved the nation of Israel?
Esther going to the king,
And what did the king
Touching
do?
the scepter.
touching the gold
And he
scepter.
extended the golden scepter to the people, and that saved them. That, even though there's no specific or explicit reference to God, that is what a reference to God's grace, the true gold of God's nature and His grace being extended to His people. And then he says, what you need is you need some gold, and he said, and you need some white garments. We talked about that before. Where do you get white garments?
Jesus.
Only from Jesus. Yeah, if He gives them to us, so that you may clothe yourself. And he says, and you also need some eye salve to anoint your eyes.
And they had the footnote says they had a medical school that produced an eye salve.
Mm-hmm.
They're also known for their banking,
Yep.
much
Yep.
money, much.
But he wasn't saying go get some of the eye salve that they were
That you
selling
made.
there in
That you
Laodicea.
made.
What kind of eye salve was he talking about?
Comes from God.
One of my favorite stories about eye salve is in 2 Kings chapter 6. You remember the story about Elisha, and they were at Dothan, and the army was coming to get them. And Elisha's servant goes out to get the newspaper in the morning, and what does he see? He sees the army has surrounded him. And he comes back and he tells Elisha, he says, what are we going to do? We're surrounded by an enemy army. And Elisha says, no, what did he do? He said, he prayed that his servant's eyes would be opened. And the servant went out the next time, and what did he see? He saw the army.
Army of God.
But he saw the armies of God and the chariots of fire that surrounded and outnumbered the enemy army that had surrounded them. So his eyes were open. He got the eye salve. And that's what God says you need. You need the eye salve so that you can see God's army and His chariots of fire that are surrounding you and protecting you, and calling time out on my lesson here. But, all right, so the bad news is about this church that they have locked Jesus out. The good news is that He stands at the door and He knocks. That any one of us, any church that has gone the wrong way, what do we have to do? Just return to Him. Just do all these positive things that we're admonished to do. We're out of time today. My goal was to finish the churches and to move into chapter 4, but if next time we need to have some more discussions about this, we'll leave it open and we'll just take whatever time we need.